I hope you've been enjoying the presentation so far today. There's been loads of great information throughout that. I'm going to echo a little bit of it through my presentation, but what I'm hoping to do is to give you a whole load of hints and tips at the end of today to take away and to action once you're away from here and when you're actually responding to tender opportunities. Obviously going through the do's and don'ts. It is very, very good to see you all here today because there are so many suppliers out there who don't try and find out how to work with the public sector before they actually go and try and work with the public sector. And a lot of them will fall at the first kind of hurdle, or the first few hurdles they encounter. And I'm going to try and go through a few of those bits and pieces with you. Public sector is a regulated market. You probably sussed that out from your dealings with the public sector and a lot of the things you've heard today. But the most important thing is obviously learning these rules before you start playing the game. These rules aren't necessarily all about good procurement. They're about getting effective competition for all of us as taxpayers. That's what they're all there for. There are basic tenets and principles behind the EU directive and the Scottish regulations and the regulations covering the rest of the UK. And those are non-discrimination, transparency, equality of treatment, proportionality and mutual recognition. They're basically there to ensure that throughout Europe, every business has the same opportunity to go for public sector work in any country in Europe, in any of the 27 member states. There was talk of local earlier. Local to the European Union is from the west coast of Ireland to the eastern border of Romania. It's a huge, huge economic area. And you guys, I appreciate that most of you will probably operate within the Scottish market, but there's no reason why, especially if it's an internet-based service you provide, that you shouldn't be looking further afield. BIP is an example of that. We work in Montenegro, we work in Africa, we work all over the world. And the same rules that are within the EU are expanded in some ways across the rest of the world under the World Trade Organization. So there's a lot of commonality in procurement across the world. Everybody has made a lot of kind of staying alert, reading the official journal of the European Union, visiting websites like Public Contract Scotland today. I can't stress this enough. There are loads of these websites. What I do recommend that you do is you find the websites that are best for your kind of the goods or works or services that you're providing to the public sector. The second last bullet point there about knowing CPV codes relevant to you and using them. Can I have a show of hands who knows what CPV codes are and what ones are relevant to them? Okay, so what I'm about to say will be relevant. CPV code stands for Common Procurement Vocabulary. It's a European-wide classification system for goods and services commonly bought by public sector across the whole of Europe. There are around about 10,000 codes, which is helpful, but this isn't an exhaustive list. So ideally what you should be doing is going and finding out what codes are relevant to your business. Some websites like the Official Journal of the European Union use these codes in order to classify things, and it helps you not only through keywords, but it helps you classify what helps you kind of reduce the amount of contracts you're looking at to ones that are more relevant to you. Saying that it's not an exhaustive list and doesn't describe anything, if I give you an example, when Tesco Direct launched in 2006, they had more than 12,500 non-food items that they sold. So for the whole of the public sector across Europe to be using 10,000 codes to describe everything, that's a bit of an ask, but it is quite a good system and it is helpful. To help make sense of all of these CPV codes, you can download either an Excel spreadsheet from the SIMAT website, which shows you all the hierarchies of the CPV codes. But one of the easiest ways to do it, if you go into the BIP website, we've got a search function. So if you provide, say for me, if I provide procurement consultancy, I put consultancy, procurement, training, keywords like that, and it'll pull up relevant CPV codes to me. I would go and do this as soon as you possibly can, and use this in any of your searches and any of the websites that you actually use to find opportunities. As I said, it's a hierarchical system, 8-digit system with a 1-digit suffix. So the more zeros in it, the kind of higher up the code system it is, and then it drills down into more specific things. And there are 7 codes for jam, for instance, and then other things that they're not quite so specific. And there are millions of potential codes in this system that they could use, but they don't. From the changeover, which I think was August, last one was August 2008, and the changeover at that time, the CPV code in the NHS for hormones changed the code for laxatives. So why they don't just use new codes, why they recycle and do that's a real example, by the way. Why they do that, I'm not quite sure. If you're asked, bottom point here, apply the rules. Don't look for ways to skirt them. All of these things, people have been talking about jumping through hoops a day and doing this and doing that and doing the next thing. If you're asked to do something, do it, follow it. Eddie mentioned in his presentation, first presentation today, that previously when there were 30 or 40 respondents to a pre-qualification questionnaire, now there's maybe 100 or more potentially. So it's a heck of a lot of competition. You don't want to be giving the public sector any opportunities at all to remove you from the process. If you're asked to respond in writing, do that. If you're responding to an official journal opportunity, then make sure you put the response number in. If the authority's got a number on it, they're allowed to reject you if you don't put something in like that, like the response number. If you're told not to put any identifying marks on the envelope when you're returning your tender, don't do it. Make sure you speak to the courier company. All of these things are basically a test. If you can't fulfil these, it's the opinion of the public sector. Well, if you can't do these simple things, how can you actually run and fulfil a tender for them? That's the way they think about it. Earlier on today, you heard Public Contract Scotland talking about a database of commonly requested information. A few of the other speakers talked in and around the subject. Some of the things that you see on the screen in front of you are the things that are commonly asked for. It's going to be very, very difficult to implement the system that was being spoken about earlier, about this one common PQQ, because every procurement's different. I've seen procurements go through the OJU for bouncy castles. There's a guy in the south coast of England in Supply Division Defence Medical down in Hampshire, and he buys pallets of live cockroaches. So having a single kind of thing for these massively different things that are being procured, yes, there will be some common information that's the same, but your address might change, your accounts are updated yearly. So even if you're being given the opportunity to put your information on one of these sites or work with an authority and give it once, make sure your information is always up to date. Make sure you don't lose out because it falls away or you're needing to put something new on there. Drilling down into a few of the things here, bank references. Can I have a show of hands, any businesses in the audience that have less than 3 years of trading at the moment? No, so you've all been going a bit longer than that, so you've all got the 3 years accounts to provide. Another thing which, if the public sector are asking for 3 years accounts, was possibly more relevant for them, maybe they should, if you're asked for 3 year accounts, give them that and say, would you like to have a copy of our management accounts as well? Because we have good liquidity just now. This will tell you much more. It's our current position. This is where we are. This is what we're planning for the next little while. If anybody wants to see kind of 3 years accounts, I'll sell them kind of Enron shares just now. 3 years accounts is looking well into the past. It could be up to maybe 18 months, 24 months out of date. So possibly providing something like management accounts is a useful thing as well. Bank references, if you didn't have the 3 years accounts, that's why I was looking for the show of hands there. Insurances. Now, insurances, you don't have to have a certain insurance level in place at the time that you're competing for the contract. You have to show that you would be able to attain a certain level of insurance if you were to win that contract. So say for instance, professional indemnity insurance. If you're asked to provide, first of all, work out whether it's relevant to the risk and the subject matter of the contract, because as was said earlier, a lot of things are copied and pasted. People that work in the public sector are human just like the rest of us. So if it's £10 million of professional indemnity insurance, that's going to cost you, today's market price is about £1,000 per £1 million. So that's £10,000. Over a 4-year contract, that's £40,000 it's going to cost you. What are you going to do? That's a sensible business. Put that into your price that you're giving the public sector. So by communicating with them and saying something straightforward like, well, you probably only need £4 or £5 million insurance and you're going to save all this money over the life of the contract because I'm going to pass this cost on to you because I don't need it for the rest of my business. So make sure that you're communicating those things to them. If you take nothing else away from today, know that you should be treated kind of fairly. If you're not treated fairly, you have rights to information, and when you find out through getting that information that you've been treated unfairly, then you have rights to challenge the public sector. Please challenge the public sector more, ask them questions. The more questions you ask them, the more intelligent a supplier you're going to look to them. Credit check. I think Eddie mentioned earlier, have you done a credit check in your organisation recently? If you've not, I would suggest it's quite a good idea. Technical information, personnel profiles, references and experience, staff turnover, comparable contracts. Staff turnover, make sure, quite a good way to express this is your staff turnover in comparison to your industry. And obviously if it's better than the average staff turnover in the industry, tell the public sector buyer about it. If it's not, don't tell them. Comparable contracts. all dread and tooth and claw. I see somebody kind of smiling over there. Comparable contracts, you cannot be asked to have provided comparable contracts within the public sector. They must just be relevant examples or relevant case studies. Give you an example. In the NHS, you cannot be asked to have provided ambulance services within the NHS. Why? The reason you can't be asked to do that is because you can provide ambulance services in a private manner in the UK. It can only be relevant to the subject matter of the contract. They cannot use that. Anything that's a barrier to competition, and that is, they cannot do it. If you're in any doubt about anything the public sector is doing, just draw it all back to think, is it fair, is there equality of treatment, proportionality, mutual recognition, transparency and mutual recognition. If it doesn't meet those basic tenets and principles that the directive is founded on, and the EU and the UK regulations and the Scottish regulations are founded on, then they probably shouldn't be doing it. They shouldn't be throwing up artificial barriers to make it more difficult for you. And if anything looks like an artificial barrier, ask them about it.